Thanks, David. That was fantastic. I must say I've had the pleasure of hearing David speak several times before. I was introduced to David by our mutual friend and colleague, Liz Broderick, who has done an incredible transformational job with the Male Champions of Change. And I have to say, David, you are one of the standout Male Champions of Change. So thank you very much. I mean, transforming an army, military, is not an easy thing to do, and I think you've just been fantastic. But I wanted to ask you something. You talk about the business imperative, if you like, or the need to introduce diversity so that we actually become high-performing organisations. We've had research for over 10 years now telling us that, and yet we're still not making the inroads that we should be making. Why do you think that is?
I think it's largely because it's a male-dominated world with the rules largely written by men, and in this country that is white Anglo-Saxon men. And for all of the white Anglo-Saxon men in the audience...
We're not going to make you stand up.
No, and if we did, I'd be standing up with you, and I'm the beneficiary of as much my parenting and my education and the support I've had as I am my gender and my racial colour. The fact is that men listen to other men, and I think that the Male Champions of Change, for which the Property Council must be applauded, is a very important step. This is not a feminist issue. This is a societal issue. We have not made the appropriate use of all of that talent that is resident in 51% of the population. And we need to. And we need to be encouraging women to join in areas that traditionally they haven't joined. Property and construction, the military, particularly the army. The army's experience is that if you change your views, you change your language, you focus on capability, you put policies in place, and you have leadership demonstrated up and down a big chain of command from a lieutenant general down to a lance corporal, you can make fundamental change. And I'll quote a statistic to close with, Carol. When we started the journey, there was less than 10% of our workforce as women. Appallingly low. And it had been that way for over a century. Just by putting in place some decent policies, having the right conversation with not just our workforce, but those men and women who were thinking perhaps maybe in their extreme thoughts of joining the military, we've now reached a point, less than 5 years later, where of all of the Army cadets at the Australian Defence Force Academy, 25% of them are women. And all of the cadets at the Royal Military College Duntroon, our finishing school for officers, 20% of them are women. And every weekly intake into our recruit training battalion in Kapuka, in Wagga, is invariably 20% women. We need those women. We need their talent. We need them to do the things that soldiers have always done. Protect Australia, safeguard its future prosperity. But if we deny all of that talent within our ranks, we simply won't be the army that the nation needs. And my point, I guess through extrapolation, is that we won't have the property industry that we will need in the future if we remain rather wedded to those stereotypical and entrenched value sets that form the basis for the criteria by which we traditionally judge merit.
Yeah, and what you're doing, of course, is creating a new type of role model.
Yeah.
And we know how important role models are, and it's good to see our Defence Minister, Marise Payne, there as a role model for us. Brian, welcome to Australia. It's lovely to have you here. I actually resigned off Facebook because Zuckerberg had no women on his board when he IPO'd, and that made me really angry. So I left Facebook. And I'm constantly amazed that in the US, where there appear to be women in very senior roles and playing senior roles in business, when you actually read the statistics around the Fortune 500, actually women on boards I think is even less than the women on boards in Australia. I think you're at around 18.5, 19%. And I think there are maybe half a dozen women CEOs of Fortune 500s. Why do you think America has been so slow in understanding this competitive issue around diversity?
I first of all, I just want to say thank you very much for having us here. It's been an amazing trip to Australia. So in the United States, I think it's very similar to Australia, where you have male leadership that has not embraced the female C-suite level to come into the workforce. And they need to get new talent into the industry, new women into the industry, so it changes that perspective.
Yeah, it's interesting though, because you had an incredibly strong feminist movement in the 70s. I was actually just watching an SBS documentary on that the other day, which reminded me about the amazing feminists that you had and how strong that movement was. You know, it was Gloria Steinem who said that the definition of feminism is really equality between men and women, so who is not a feminist? So where have all those voices gone, and why have they not had the impact?
They're starting to have impact. That's the good news. I will say in the commercial real estate industry in the United States, BOMA membership is now 50% men and 50% women, which is outstanding. There are definite disparities though. That unfortunately, I just read a study that only 11% of women in commercial real estate make over $100,000 a year, where men, 31%, make over $100,000 a year. So it's the change. It needs to change. There are groups in the United States like CREW, which is CREW. I don't know if any of you are aware of it, but they are championing women in the commercial real estate industry. They're career development training. They're recruiting new talent in the industry, and that's where I think it'll start to change and start to evolve, and having more women in leadership.
Yeah, I have the very great pleasure of being the coordinator of the Property Male Champions of Change, and we have 3 of our male champions here, Bob, Jonathan and Mark. Bob, how do you think we're going in our Male Champions of Change? Thank you.
Well, thanks, Carol. Look, I think we got off to a bit of a rocky start, to be quite frank. I think we all came together, and I think we're all quite competitive and wanted to talk about how good we were in our particular businesses. But I think, and then we had, I think there was a conference in Sydney which didn't do us a whole lot of good, to be quite frank, except we walked away from that saying, that was terrible and we need to do something about it. And I do think we've now come together much stronger and have learnt from that experience. The conversation around the table is very rich now. We're talking about how do we measure. We've got a whole raft of work streams that we've now, and some might say there's too many initiatives, but I think we've got a raft of work streams that we think will make a difference over time. And it's important that we do get traction in each of those. I'm championing the mainstreaming of flexibility, which we think is crucial to retaining talent. First of all, we've got to attract talent into the sector, but retaining talent and mainstreaming flexibility has got to be an important part of that. So, look, I think you got off to a rocky start, but I do think we've got a group now of committed leaders who want to make a difference, understand the business case, and now have got, I think, or distilled what we think are some levers that if we're successful in, will change the game over the next 3 to 5 years. So.
And Jonathan, do you think that potentially one of the impediments to women's progress through to the senior ranks of property businesses is the fact that they don't necessarily look like traditional property people?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, the short answer has to be yes. I mean, I think everyone sort of recognises broadly the phenomenon of unconscious bias and people in senior leadership roles believing that the sort of people that will take the business through to the next, 5, 10 years is someone remarkably like me. That's, I think, an accepted fact. I think what we need to come up with is really breaking that paradigm and the basically have the discussion about the issues and put in place the plans to break that paradigm.
And Mark, whilst you were doing your property report, David was having a chat to us about how in the military he actually introduced the concept of promoting women when they were on maternity leave or had taken time out for a particular reason. Do you think that would work in the property industry?
Look, I think well, absolutely. It sends a pretty powerful message. But at the same time, clearly, as you described before, it has to be on merit. And I think, it is a little bit difficult to guarantee that, people would be systematically promoted while on leave. And I guess that's not really what you're suggesting. But, we have done that. And I think I hear stories of other property companies starting to do that where it's appropriate. So to continue to stay conscious of all the people that you have that are available to take on different roles. And I think that is a big part of it. I mean, staying in contact while people are on parental leave, whether they be women or men, is part of that consciousness. That actually makes a big difference. People feel comfortable quite often to come back because they don't feel like they've been excluded during that time. And I think the whole idea of consciousness also starts to address unconscious bias, which is a big deal and something that does impede a lot of these aspects. And similarly, just talking about these opportunities, talking about that and keeping that consciousness also translates into, I think, people starting to move beyond the stereotypes, move beyond the history, and to start to say, okay, maybe this is real, because it's going to be not just what people talk about, but what they do, and those two things combined will ultimately demonstrate whether there is a genuineness to this and whether there will actually be a fairness to this. And as that transcends, if you will, then people trust, and with trust, acceleration and change. And the good thing about this is actually when it starts to move, as long as it's all true, it will move at an ever faster rate. And so I'm very confident about what the future will look like.
You mentioned the word merit. There's been a lot of discussion about the myth of merit, because merit is actually a set of criteria that's put together by the dominant group. And if the dominant group is male, then the criteria that that particular male leader puts out there as constituting merit is what is merit. David, do you want to talk about that at all?
Yeah, I mean, I think very few people would disagree with the proposition that promotion or appointment should be based on merit. But how you define merit has to, I think, at least be addressed in the first instance. If merit, as Jonathan said, is largely defined by choosing someone who looks like you or sounds like you or has your same value set, then that might work to a point, but it hardly seems to me to be the model that businesses should be basing their long-term strategy on, because as this industry knows full well, times change, and anyone who thinks that the world is going to remain in our lifetime as it is now in 2015, I think is probably not reading the right sort of literature at the moment or listening to the right sort of arguments. We're about to see some very fundamental changes in our lifetime, and we would want, I'm sure, our industries to be in the best hands to deal with those changes. Simple fact is that, men who are my age and my seniority, with my background, my education, and the benefits that have accrued to them largely as a result of their birthright, have done okay to a point, but they don't have a stranglehold on all of the solutions for the future. They simply don't. I don't think that that's illogical in any respect to put forward as a proposition. And so I think that there does need to be an assessment within the dominant group, because it's largely male, and in this country it's largely Anglo-Saxon. There needs to be a reassessment about whether the criteria you're using at the moment is right for your future. The Army did it and came to the conclusion that we didn't have the dial set, ideally. As a consequence, we had within our system, and I know it's very different in the corporate world, but in our system we had meetings annually for what we call the promotion advisory committees. And they're a big deal. They select you for your next rank, up to and including Major General. And yet the decisions about who was being selected was being made by a very traditional set, male, Anglo-Saxon. So we shook it up. We brought women with no military background onto all of our advisory committees, simply so that they could offer a view. And what we found was that while they hardly dominated the conversation, when they spoke, they always spoke with a clarity that stopped the conversation around the table and at least gave people the chance to make a reassessment based on a different view. I'm absolutely certain that as a consequence of that, we didn't just see more women promoted, we saw better men promoted as well, because they were providing something different to the paradigm by which we had existed for, well, about 114 years. And I'm held to account, well, was held to account by you and by the government to deliver the most capable army. Full stop. There was no social engineering going on here. This was about producing the best army for our security in the future. And I think we achieved that by stopping, saying we haven't actually got the dial to the right setting, let's shake it up, let's try something different, and surprise, surprise, we got more talent in the right spots.